to this week's college-wide seminar. Before we get started, I want to gratefully acknowledge this seminar for today not only sponsored by the college and the Moore Family Center, but also the Oregon Dairy Council. So thank you for offering support for bringing our speaker here. So today is the Friday the 13th, but I must say we're very lucky to have our speaker here today. We've tried to get her here on several occasions, and we've been thwarted by weather. We were almost thwarted this time as well with some crazy wind apparently in the Midwest. But very excited to have Dr. Carolyn Gunther here. She is an assistant professor at The Ohio State University, which is also one of my alumni as well. She got her degree in nutrition at Purdue. She joined the faculty, I have to check my notes here, at Ohio State in 2004, where she acted as the assistant director and then director of the Office of Research in the College of Education and Human Ecology. She then transitioned into a tenure-track position where she has stayed. She contributes both to the dietetics program, the nutrition program at Ohio State University. She does a lot of work with extension as well, and a lot of her research is community-based, family-based interventions around healthy eating and obesity prevention. And today she's going to talk about some of her recent projects around calcium in dairy, where she also has worked quite closely with researchers here at Oregon State as part of a multi-state project through the Ag Experiment Station in USDA. So she's a familiar face to many here.
Thank you, Dr. Ho, and thank you for the invitation. As Dr. Ho mentioned, my flight got canceled, or didn't get canceled, it got delayed severely out of Columbus yesterday. I missed my flight in Chicago, but I got here last night, and I'm super happy to be here. This is a fun visit because there's so many familiar faces in the audience, and I've had great, even in my short time here, I've had great meetings this morning. So it's fun to learn about what you're doing, to share about what I'm doing, and where there's potential overlap. So as Dr. Ho mentioned, I joined the Ohio State faculty several years ago, and I'm headed into the fourth year of my position there. And most of our work, my team's work, centers on childhood obesity prevention. So we're in the business of designing and testing health behavior interventions to prevent obesity, and particularly in disadvantaged populations K through 5th. So most of my work is focused on that, but we do have, part of my program is focused on dairy calcium, and as Dr. Ho mentioned, I did my training at Purdue, and they're the big calcium and vitamin D department, nutrition department in the country, and so this work really is an extension, sort of an extension of what I was doing during my doctoral training at Purdue. So anyway, it's fun to share about this, and thank you to the Dairy Council for sponsoring today's talk. So I told Dr. Ho also that professors are very bad at following instructions, so I changed the title of my talk as I was preparing for it because it really better reflects the direction that we're headed. So today I'm going to be talking about the role of dairy in ameliorating cardiometabolic risk in college students. Okay, so we all know these statistics fairly well. 1/3 of American adults are obese. Okay, and I need to make sure that I'm following directions here where I'm moving. Actually, I'm going to use the pointer here. So even though I like to move around. Okay, so here, these are the latest NHANES statistics. You all know them quite well. And so we're looking here at total adults. The rate of obesity among adult Americans increases from young adults to middle adulthood and slightly decreases in the elderly years. The trends are fairly similar across men and women, but the takeaway point that I want you to be reminded of is that adult obesity is a major public health problem. It continues to be so. And so those of us in nutrition and public health have work to do. So college students, this is counterintuitive. You think college students are in the prime of their life. Many of them are from very advantaged backgrounds. They're receiving their higher ed degree. I think when I was putting this talk together, I thought it's really counterintuitive that this population in the U.S. is actually, they're just as unprotected from risk as everyone else, risk for obesity. Okay, so these are some very recent statistics on a very large nationally representative cohort of college students. So let me look here. So these reflect the statistics that we looked at on the previous page. So college students are considered young adults, so they're in that population. But the bottom line is that a third of college students today are overweight or obese. And here I'm showing you some statistics from Ohio State, the Ohio State University in Columbus, from our team. We just collected these data last spring. It was a sub-study as part of a much larger study. And the statistics mirror national statistics fairly well. We're a little bit lower than the national statistics. But still, it's a high proportion of college students who are at risk for being overweight or obese. Okay, so this presents a major problem as, again, these individuals are laying the foundation for their future. So what are the consequences of excess adiposity, specifically in the college student population? Well, there's good data showing that college students who are obese are at increased risk for mental health problems such as depression, stigmatization, even impaired academic achievement. So there's very recent data showing that college students who are obese have a lower GPA. And then we know this data well as nutrition and public health scientists that individuals who are carrying excess adiposity are at increased risk for cardiometabolic abnormalities, which of course puts you at an increased risk for chronic illnesses such as cardiovascular disease, stroke, and diabetes. Okay, and so this is a problem. So let's look a little bit closer at this data right here, the cardiometabolic abnormalities. So I'm showing you data from a study conducted in 2012 at a Midwestern university in Wisconsin. You can guess what it is. This is surprising data. So they are looking at the specific target population of college students. And you can see here that a very high proportion, so 43% of the students that were part of this study presented with at least one cardiometabolic abnormality. And it was, most often it was low HDL. And 13% presented with at least two cardiometabolic abnormalities, most often low LDL. Even more surprising, a little more than 6% of the participants in this study who are apparently healthy college-age adults. Okay, so they look otherwise normal. Were diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. Okay, so these data on this next slide are from our group. They're not published. We collected them this last spring, but they're similar to the data that we looked at on the previous slide. Okay, so this was shocking to us. So we sampled college students. We took heights and weights anthropometrics and these biometrics and blood samples and found that 24%, okay, so this is a sample of 160 apparently healthy college students, 24% were diagnosed, or we didn't diagnose them, but they had levels of fasting blood glucose that classified them as pre-diabetic. So this was shocking to us, and the trend is similar across other measures here. So almost 24% were borderline for high cholesterol, total cholesterol. 16% had low LDL, and so on. Okay, so yes.
Can I just ask you a really quick question? I want to make sure I'm getting this right. Mm-hmm. These are of all the college students, not those that were specifically overweight or obese? Is this everybody?
These are everybody. Okay. These are everybody. And it's adjusted for, I've adjusted these data for gender, and I think that was the only other thing. But so we had this very large study going on campus that I'll present data on later in today's talk. and we collected data. They're apparently healthy college students on a random subset of those individuals. 160 of those came in for these additional data collection measures, and 24% of these kids were pre-diabetic, which provided really nice data for preliminary data for a grant right now. So this was a shock to us, but it's worth noting that it shouldn't be so surprising because it parallels data from some other studies, so it's corroborative data. Okay, so why is this happening? It's happening in part, why are we seeing these trends in obesity, right, in the college student population? Why are we seeing these cardiometabolic abnormalities? What's driving this? It's poor eating behaviors, and which is due in part in the college population to a shift in the quality of foods available in their immediate living situation. Okay, so kids move away from home, typically a stable environment with my refrigerator does not look like that. And now that I've been away for 2 days, it surely does not look like that. But this is just sort of a pictorial representation of the typical college student's fridge, and there's the data to back it up. Okay, so it's not just the environment that drives poor eating behaviors among college students, but we know that it's also related to personal factors as well. So I know that I'm speaking to a diverse audience, scholarly, diverse audience. And so the biochemists work from biological mechanisms to explain various phenomenons, and the applied nutritionists work from theoretical frameworks to explain behavior. Okay, so here we're looking at the social cognitive theory of behavior change, and which reports that behavior formation, behavior change is the result of a reciprocal relationship between environmental factors and personal factors. Okay, so if we apply this to the college student population and the nutrition-related health issue that they're dealing with, right? We know that some of the factors in this specific population that are leading to poor eating behaviors and risk for obesity and cardiometabolic abnormalities are the unhealthy food environment. And on the personal level, we know that it's related to poor foods and nutrition knowledge, skills, and psychosocial factors. I'm going to go into this a little bit in more depth later in the talk. Okay, so which health behavior interventions are the most efficacious? I know we have students in the audience. Those that target the environment or the personal factors, or both. We know that the most efficacious health behavior interventions are those that target both the environment and the individual. Okay, and so that really this theoretical framework really is what my team and other community nutritionists and public health nutritionists work from. And so we're always thinking about how to modify the built environment to make the healthy choice the easy choice, and how to equip the individual with the knowledge, skills, and other resources that they need in order to make healthy behaviors and get them on a healthy weight gain trajectory. Okay, so let's shift gears a little now. We know that one positive dietary behavior is intake of dairy foods, milk and dairy foods, okay? And so, and the 2010 dietary guidelines for Americans, which will be outdated soon, recommends 3 servings of low-fat and fat-free dairy per day in order to achieve these various health benefits. Okay, so dairy is a rich source of calcium, vitamin D, potassium, and protein, and we know that routine intake of dairy at 3 servings a day improves bone health, reduces risk for osteoporosis later in life. And there's also data, at least in the college population, observational epi data showing that increased intake of dairy reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and high blood pressure. Okay, so let's look at some data that backs that statement. Here we're looking at a very large cohort study. This was conducted in Brazil. We're looking at healthy adults. Okay, pretty broad age range from about 30 years old to 50s or 60s. But here they showed that dairy consumption, routine dairy consumption up to greater than 4 servings per day significantly reduces fasting blood glucose, postprandial blood glucose, and HbA1c. Okay, and so this is nice epidemiological data that provides sort of a not a cause-effect relationship, but it provides evidence that dairy intake may in healthy adults protect against some of these cardiometabolic abnormalities. And our lab, this is unpublished data from the study that I referred to earlier that we just completed in the spring 2015, has corroborating data. So in the 160 healthy college students that I referred to earlier, we have good data. These are just basic partial correlations. Milk intake inversely relates to, not at a significant level, but this is fasting blood glucose, total cholesterol. Total dairy intake we saw was inversely related to fasting blood glucose. Okay, so this is cross-sectional data. Again, it doesn't, as you know, establish a cause-effect relationship between dairy and protection against cardiometabolic risk, but it's good preliminary data showing that there might be something there. This might be worth testing. Okay, so what is dairy intake? What is the level of dairy intake in college students? Well, no surprise, it's low, and the data routinely show this. Data of studies of all types, that dairy intake in college students is low. This is from a 2012 study. I think about, so over 200 subjects, and the average intake of dairy, daily intake of dairy was 1.5 cups. Okay, and so we know that the recommendation is 3, so this is significantly lower than the current recommendation for dairy. Okay, so let's bring back up our theoretical framework, the social cognitive theory, and relate this to low dairy intake in college students. Okay, so this is a framework for helping us understand eating behaviors. In this case, we're talking about dairy intake. So why might dairy intake be low in college students? Well, we have that data. And so we know that it's in part due to limited availability of dairy in campus settings. Okay, so again, that's on the environmental level. If you look on the personal level, we know that low intake of dairy is related to poor dairy knowledge. When I say poor dairy knowledge, I'm referring to the recommended servings per day. That's one explanatory variable. We also know that there's poor knowledge related to disease susceptibility. So there's a lack of knowledge about the role that dairy may play, for example, in protecting against osteoporosis. We also know from this recent study by Clark and Zimmerman that among college students specifically that we see poor dairy behavioral skills. Behavioral skills or cognitive behavioral techniques are things like goal setting and self-monitoring. And we know that when an individual has these behavioral skills or cognitive behavioral techniques, that they're more likely to acquire these important psychosocial factors like self-efficacy or confidence and self-regulation that empowers the individual to make healthy eating choices, in this case, consuming adequate amounts of dairy. Okay, so again, we're applying the social cognitive theory of behavior change to dairy intake to understand what are the causal factors for low dairy intake in college students. Okay, and so the nice thing about this framework is that it not only helps us understand the causal factors, but it serves as a great framework for designing interventions. Okay, and so this is, I'm really setting the stage here for what our team is doing as it relates to dairy intake in college students. Okay, so this got us to thinking that we would first attack the environmental piece, or first address the environmental piece of the equation. And so knowing that college students have look at this. So this is the average number of dairy products in the typical or per participant in this particular study. So knowing that this environmental piece that's driving low dairy intake is a real phenomenon led us to thinking about ways that we might alter the built environment in the settings in which college students are living to improve their eating choices, specifically related to dairy. And so all of you graduate students in school right now, like this, I remember as a graduate student waking up in the middle of the night, coming up with ideas for, what receptor might be explaining this phenomenon. Well, that waking up in the middle of the night with great ideas, it never stops. So I woke up one night and thought, well, why don't we just, install milk vending machines into dorms and see what happens. So historically, we think of vending machines as being, as contributing to a poor eating environment. But in fact, because they're placed in and they can be placed in highly trafficked areas, because there's such tight control of the foods offered in vending machines, it actually offers a great opportunity for positive change with regards to people's diets. And we know from past studies that dairy vending machines, specifically milk vending machines, have been successful in other settings like secondary schools. Okay, so we conducted a pilot study to explore the feasibility of milk vending as a novel approach for improving milk intake in college students. The backdrop to this is that we did try to do dairy machine installation, and it was way more complicated and way more expensive than putting in a milk vending machine with shelf-stable milk. Okay, so data from that study showed that in 150 students, that study was conducted at Ohio State, obviously, we showed that there was a direct or positive association between milk vending purchases over the past, or over a period of a month's time, and calcium intake from milk. Okay, and so this served as really great preliminary data suggesting that when you alter the built environment in which someone lives, that you can actually change their behavior and get them onto a healthy trajectory. So as related to milk vending and milk. Okay, so this led us to our hypothesis that installation of milk vending machines in dorms will increase students' milk intake, college students' milk intake. The objective of this study was to determine the impact of introducing milk vending in college campus dorms on students' milk intake. Okay, so this was a pre-post test study. Our target population was a convenient sample of male and female college students living in undergraduate dorms, and the setting was residence halls on the main campus. So let's take a look at the study design here. So in the summer, prior to the students' return to campus, we selected 2 dorms to intervene in, and they were dorms that were representative of, or that housed students that were representative of the larger population at Ohio State. In August, students came back to campus. We then conducted subject recruitment and did a pre-test data collection. Immediately thereafter, we installed the milk vending machines and then promoted them in the dorms, so students were aware that the milk vending machines were there. And then we allowed for an adaptation period. Again, this is all occurring during the fall semester. And then after the adaptation period, we conducted a post-test data collection, okay, prior to the semester ending, prior to finals, when behaviors, all types of health behaviors could change. So, right. So the milk vending machines offered 6 varieties of low-fat flavored milk, and we did have 1 fat-free flavored milk option. These were large bottles, 16-ounce bottles.
They weren't all flavored though, right?
They actually, I need to make sure I'm putting the right thing on, I'm not mixing up studies. They actually, I believe they all were flavored.
Oh.
So that's the tricky part of this research, is that we have very little, researchers have very little control over the vending options. So that's really, it's all about a contract between the university and the vendor itself. So that it takes a lot, it causes things really to be out of our control very, very much. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about this survey methodology. So we used an online survey methodology approach. We asked students about their milk vending purchases over the past month, so during that period when the milk vending was available in their dorms. We asked them questions about their attitudes concerning milk vending specifically. These are the various constructs that we're interested: convenience, taste, health, family, friend influence, and then past milk vending consumer. And then we also administered, as part of this study online, the NIH-validated short food frequency questionnaire, and then collected demographic data. Okay, so let's take a look at the subject characteristics of this sample here. So the majority of our subjects were 18 to 20 years old, as we expected. Most of our subjects were non-Hispanic whites, followed by Asians, and this data really is reflective of the larger population at Ohio State, mostly females and mostly freshmen and sophomores, which we expected because we were intervening in dorms. Okay, so in these next 2 columns here, I'm showing you the demographics, the same demographics by milk vendor purchasing status, yes and no. This will make sense in the next slide, but we saw no significant differences in these demographic characteristics between groups. Okay, so let's take a look at the data. Remember, this is a pre-post test study design. We're looking at milk intake among these individuals who were living in these dorms, those who we surveyed. And if you look at all of the subjects together, so our hypothesis was, well, let's forget that for right now, but I'll come back to that. So if you look at all of the subjects together, that's represented by this black line, there's no difference between the pre and the post test in milk intake. Okay, so this isn't milk intake, this is total milk intake, not just milk intake from vending machines. So that was interesting. And then it led us to conduct, or to explore the data further by milk vending purchaser status. So in subjects who reported purchasing milk over the past month period, we saw an increase that was not significant in milk intake. On the other hand, in subjects who reported not having purchased milk vending in the past, previous month, we saw a significant decrease in milk consumption. And so this is important to note because the literature shows that as a student, during the time that they arrive on campus, and establish their behaviors there, to say the mid semester, you see a decline in overall diet quality. So you could say that we actually, in all subjects, prevented a decline by installing these milk vending machines. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this slide. This is the same type of data. We're looking specifically at calcium for milk. So let's take a look at the attitudes of milk vending purchasers versus the non-purchasers. This provides information for future marketing research. And all I want to point out here is that there were no differences in attitudes regarding milk vending as it relates to health, family, friend influence, and past milk vending consumers during their high school years. The only difference we saw was that the milk vending purchasers were more likely to agree with the statement that milk vending was convenient and tasted good. And so this information is important because it could help us with marketing the milk vending better to this milk vending non-purchasing group. Okay, so summary of results from the pre-post test milk vending study is that milk vending consumers were protected from a decline in milk intake, and the milk vending consumers were more likely to agree that they consume vended milk because it's convenient and they enjoy the taste. Okay, so let's go back to our mechanism or our model, our framework for understanding the problem of low dairy intake in college students. And so, as I mentioned, this really frames our research agenda for this particular line of research. And we've talked about a little bit about the possibility or promise of altering the built environment in order to improve dairy intake in college students, and milk vending may be one way to address the problem, a small, part of the solution. But we're also interested in targeting the individual as well, okay? And so you see the first line here, one of the reasons for low dairy intake in college students is poor dairy knowledge, meaning recommended servings per day, and then disease susceptibility when the recommendations aren't met. And so, so let's talk about our work in that area. So this is where I was talking with Dr. Wang about the importance of doing interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work. And when we came to this point here, how do we address this problem, in a meaningful way in a very large, the Ohio State college student population is enormous. How do we effectively improve dairy knowledge in college students? And so I went to my friends in the School of Communication, Health Communication, and said, how do we do this? How do we improve the cognitive and affective determinants of nutrition behaviors, cognitive meaning knowledge, affective meaning your attitudes and beliefs? And they said, well, you're venturing into the field of health communication, and the way that we address this is through social marketing campaigns. And I know that you have, in your department, you have one study where you're conducting a fruit and vegetable social marketing campaign. And so we applied this approach of social marketing to the problem of low, as a potential solution to addressing the problem of low dairy intake in college students. Okay, so then my students and I jumped into the literature and figured out what are the benchmark criteria for conducting a successful social marketing intervention, and these are the criteria here. There must be a behavioral objective, so in our case, it's increasing dairy intake. You need to segment your audience. So in our case, we're specifically interested in college students, meaning the traditional college student. Audience research. You need to know your audience. What's important to them. What's relevant to them. There needs to be some sort of tangible exchange in a successful social marketing campaign. So in this case, if as part of our social marketing campaign that I'll talk about in a second, we were very intentional about having in-person campus events that students attended. When they attended them, we actually gave them dairy. So there was a tangible exchange. They could see the benefit, experience it right there of engaging in the target behavior. There needs to be a marketing mix. Okay, so what do I mean by that? It can't just be print media, but we need to do embrace social media. campus events or in-person events as well. And then competition is another piece to a successful social marketing campaign. And so if, for example, milk, a competitor product of milk is, say, pop, then we need to make milk more appealing, we need to make it more available, we need to make it cheaper. And then the other piece, no surprise to a successful social marketing campaign, is having a theoretical framework. And so this is the one that we worked from, which I'll go through very quickly. But the elaboration likelihood model proposes that in order to elicit lasting behavioral change in response to exposure to a message, that it requires stimulating the central processing pathway. And in order to stimulate that pathway, the individual needs to be motivated to engage in the target behavior, which is influenced by their attitudes towards the target behavior and relevancy of the topic of interest. And it's also determined by the individual's ability to process the message. So their level of knowledge about the issue at hand, and then their cognitive resources. Okay, so this was the theoretical framework that we were working from. So we decided knowing that going back to the social cognitive theory of behavior change, remember that we're trying to impact students' knowledge about dairy and disease susceptibility, led us to conduct this pilot study. The aim of this pilot study was to explore the feasibility of a social marketing campaign focused on dairy, designed to improve attitudes related to dairy intake. I'm limiting our outcomes to attitudes simply because in collaborating with our communication scientists, the likelihood of eliciting behavior change in response to exposure to a message is, even though we have a really nice theoretical framework that I was talking about in the last page, the likelihood of that is pretty low. So the aim of this was simply to improve attitudes towards dairy. Okay, our hypothesis for this pilot was that a theory-based, multi-component dairy promotion campaign will effectively engage students and increase their awareness of and improve the attitudes towards dairy. To test this hypothesis, we designed a study to test the feasibility, acceptability, and limited effectiveness. So those of you doing feasibility trials, these terms are familiar to you, of a very short-term campus campaign designed to promote awareness of and attitudes towards dairy in the college student population. Okay, so this is a 4-week study design that occurred at the beginning of the academic year. So this is a period of risk. Students come back, and this is when we see the deterioration in diet. So we're hitting them right at the beginning of the academic year. After the campaign was over, we administered an online survey that IRB let us send to every single undergraduate student at Ohio State. And then again, this was a study that was conducted on the main campus of Ohio State. So here's a look at the study design, which I went over on the last slide. But remember, this is a multi-component social marketing campaign. So there was print media involved. We had a social media piece as well, so Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then we figured out which were the most highly attended events at Ohio State, highly attended by college students. And we set up booths at those particular events. So in developing the messaging for the campaign, we worked directly with graphic artists, marketing experts, and communication majors. Our ambassadors for the campaign, we learned from previous research, were well-known student athletes. That would be an ambassador, campaign ambassador that would actually motivate students to listen to the message that we were delivering. So we recruited 2 male athletes, each representing a different sport, and then developed a campaign logo and tagline, as well as a hashtag. These all were were developed directly with this team of graphic artists, the marketing experts, and then students who were communication majors. Okay, so the educational content and the messaging was aligned with the USDA MyPlate guidelines. And then as part of the educational, or as part of the messaging content in the campaign, to stimulate that, or to affect the motivation of our target population, we asked our campaign ambassadors to respond to these questions. So why do you drink milk? When do you drink milk? What kind of milk do you drink? And what other calcium-rich foods do you eat? And so their responses to these questions were included as part of the messaging for this campaign. So I already mentioned it's a three-component campaign. So I'm going to breeze through this pretty quickly. This is a screenshot of our Facebook page. And then I'm going to keep moving along here. Okay, so let's talk about the evaluation piece. So this is a feasibility study. So we're simply, feasibility just means, can we get this, it's a proof of concept kind of study, can we get this to work? Can we engage students and sort of determine whether or not they were aware of it or not? Okay, so campaign awareness was assessed through the online survey. To assess feasibility of the social media aspect of the campaign, we gathered data for Facebook on number of posts, post views and likes, tweets and followers for Twitter, for Instagram, the number of posts, followers, and contest entries. So a collaborative mind and extension who has expertise in social media, that was a really critical, Jamie Seeger was a critical collaboration to understand what feasibility outcomes would be meaningful as part of this evaluation. We for the print media piece, we just simply documented the number of print materials, posters and flyers that were distributed, and then to assess the feasibility of the events, we just counted the number of events hosted, how many students attended, that was an estimated number, and then the promotional items distributed. Okay, so to assess acceptability of the campaign, we asked students when we sent out that online survey to rank their top 3 favorite parts. And then we also assessed limited effectiveness. We asked students if they felt that the campaign improved their awareness of the importance of dairy intake and their attitudes towards dairy. So that was, remember, this is a feasibility trial. So a couple questions to assess acceptability and feasibility. Okay. So let's take a look at the data. We had a response rate of 7%, which represents an N of a little over 3,000. And I won't drag you through these data, but we've compared them with university data on undergraduates, and in terms of race, ethnicity, it's very similar. We had a higher proportion of males versus females, which you don't see at the university level. It was nice to see a fairly equal spread across ranks, which is different than the vending study where we were targeting the younger students. 32% of students who were surveyed reported that they were aware of the campaign. Facebook we're running short on time, so I'm going to move quickly through this, but I'll just tell you that Facebook was as a surprise, was our most successful social media part. Okay. So, and you can see on this last page that our median of views per post was about 363, and likes was about 20.5 per post. But when we put up Aaron, our famous basketball player, that the views were just completely spiked. So student athletes are very powerful with the target population. All right, I'm going to keep moving through this. So the most favored parts of the campaign were, in this order, the promotional items that were given away, the posters, and our campus events. All right, so that's a summary of the results. I'm sorry, Dr. Ho. I want to share this data with you. So this is the last piece of research that I'll share. But so from that, we conducted that 4-week feasibility trial of the social marketing campaign designed to improve the awareness and attitudes towards dairy, and got another grant to expand the campaign to span the academic year. And in this study, so it's a repeated measures design study, in this study we expanded our outcomes to include attitudes and beliefs, as well as behaviors surrounding dairy, and we're using Carolyn W, who's at University of Hawaii. We're using her survey adapted to the college population. We're also administering the NIH-validated short food frequency calcium survey, and then self-report health outcomes. Okay, and so so that's one different media for that. And then this is interesting data. So, and I'll end on this, but this is showing that individuals who participated in the campaign throughout the first half of the year, I'm just showing you the first half of the year, we saw significant improvements in attitudes towards milk and dairy and certain purchasing behaviors. And it was specifically the social media part of the campaign that produced the significant findings related to attitudes and behaviors. So, so social media is a powerful tool for college students and getting them to change their behaviors, more so than distribution of print media, more so than these campus events. It was really the social media piece of the campaign that led to significant changes in milk and, or attitudes towards milk and dairy. Okay, so where are we headed from here? I've shared with you data on our milk vending studies, you know, the idea that you modify the built environment and make the healthy choice the easy choice. You know, that's research that we've pursued. And actually the truth is that Ohio State, and I'm sure it's similar on your campus, is doing a really, they're being very aggressive about making the environment healthy. And so, so that's encouraging news. We've tested a nice social marketing campaign that shows some promise in improving dairy knowledge. But this is really the next step for us is you know, targeting the individual in a more intensive way to actually see meaningful behavior change and which would lead to a better health, right? And so that's really where we're headed, is to, you know, while pursuing changes to the built environment to make the eating environment more healthy and having these very low-touch peripheral interventions such as a social marketing campaign going on. The next step really to getting people to change their behavior as it relates to dairy to improve their health is to do a more intensive one-on-one intervention at the individual and group level. And so in order to build these behavioral skills like goal setting and self-monitoring, which lead to improved self-efficacy and self-regulation, to increase dairy, that's really where we're headed, is getting people to change their eating behaviors. And so that's what we're pursuing right now, is getting a grant to head in that direction, and then also to measure cardiometabolic biomarkers in response to higher dairy diet in a supportive environment with the counseling that's needed. So that was a lot of information. I'm going to move quickly, but thanks for your attention, and maybe we have a couple minutes for questions.
I don't know what the climate is relative to your population of students, but my perception in the West Coast is that there is a really negative view of dairy consumption among college students in particular. And so I'm just sort of curious, and some of those are perceptions of cons for reasons that they don't consume milk. And I'm just curious about whether or not you have any kind of a beat. And then I can give you some examples of what those are, like the environmental impact, cruelty to animals, that whole piece. Then there is the intolerance, lactose intolerance, which is not necessarily geographically predetermined. But I'm wondering if you have differences. I don't know the extent to which there's evidence that these differences are reflective of geographic areas.
Yeah, and I don't know the data on the West Coast data, but our data show that the Midwest student is, that they're, you don't see the same opposition to dairy that you might see in the West Coast. Okay, so they're more accepting, and that's just a cultural phenomenon,
right,
living in a dairy farming state. There are plenty, having said that, there is a proportion of students who aren't consuming dairy and they want to know other sources of, food and beverage sources of calcium. And so this was a dairy talk, but we really, and you saw it for the social marketing campaign, that we highlight calcium and protein and highlight other food sources and beverage sources of calcium-rich food. So, the millennials in general are a different breed, and yeah. So we need to be aware of that there are, that there are individuals in the millennial population, even in the Midwest, who are opposed to consuming dairy.
Yeah. Your data, though, on the incidence of some of those markers of cardiometabolic risk is really important, because some of the other things we found is they don't think they're at risk yet, and therefore don't necessarily practice preventive behaviors.
That's right. It is. That was phenomenal. I mean, that was enough. Just like analyzing that data, I just walked down to Rich Bruno's office and I was like, we're writing a grant right now. It's a serious public health problem. Because, like you said, there's a lack of perception that there's a health problem, because they're not presenting. It's subclinical. They're not presenting with any. They're asymptomatic, essentially.
We can all talk prevention, but they got to buy that there's a need for prevention.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
That's right.
So great segue from the Midwest. I wanted to apologize. We were chuckling a bit because I was born in Michigan, and your use of pop made me laugh. So I apologize. But a great segue as well from the prediabetes is I'm an obesity researcher, physiology person. I don't know much about behavior change, but I can tell you that obesity is obviously a very strong predictor of prediabetes. And I'm curious how well your measures of prediabetes correlate with the individuals who are obese. And the layered question on top of that then is, if you're just promoting food intake, I'm really curious how that changes energy intake, from the context of, if you just say you should add this to your diet, how does that change energy intake? Because I know from a lipid background, when you tell individuals olive oil is good, they don't lay off the ranch. They just add olive oil.
Right. Yeah. You're right. There has to be education in making food substitutions. I ran a dairy intervention as part of my doctoral work, and in doing the individual dietary counseling with the college students, that's part of the education, is that you just don't dump on dairy to your diet, but we're going to educate you on how to make smart substitutions.
Does your data support that? I don't know if you have data to say that when those individuals adopt I was really curious who the people are who hit the vending machine over 12 times a month.
Yeah. We don't have that data, but that's we will hopefully.
Okay.
So I don't know whether you know or you've seen the data that's been collected by the Ohio State football team on metabolic syndrome and their athletes. Have you seen that data? It's pretty amazing. You should look at it. It was published in MedSci a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a lot of football players marching their way. As soon as they get out of college and don't have athletics, well, it's pretty much going to be over for them. They'll have a chronic disease almost instantly. So if you haven't seen that data, you should look at it.
Well, I mean, I know of the phenomenon, you know, of
They
metabolic
published some
syndrome.
research on that, and they did some really nice markers. They did DEXA, they looked at body comp, they did all the metabolic markers, they did insulin resistance.
Mhm.
In terms of the vending machines, I noticed it was all flavored milk. How do you balance the risks of sugar-sweetened beverages with the milk consumption?
Yeah, that's a great question. Vending research is really difficult. I would not have, I mean, when I wrote the grant and got it funded, we were proposing a dairy vending machine with low-fat and fat-free products, flavored, not flavored, but it turns out that it's not feasible, not at a large institution like Ohio State, whose business office has contracts with vendors and they're virtually inflexible. So, you know, in an ideal world, so actually what's happened, I'll share, that these vending machines initially, the deal that I made was that they would install them temporarily and remove them. And what's happened is that the vending machines have stayed. They have reduced the ounces, so that's good news. And there are now not non-flavored options offered, but it's tricky research because it's really out of your control. I know that there's a faculty member at Ithaca who does vending research, and it's a lot easier at a smaller institution. There's less red tape, and that town happens to be incredibly progressive. So that's a difference too. You know, Mary was Dr. Kleski's mentioned that the culture of students is very different across the country. So so the student in Ithaca would be open to other dairy options that I think are suited to healthier and say on the student.
One more quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very quick then. I'm curious about the IRB that you had with no opting in or out, but it just went to all the students on campus?
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't question it. I just asked them to send it out to everybody, and then they signed off on it. It's a minor miracle.
On that note, let's thank Dr. Gunther for coming on.